A chilly afternoon in early January 1945 found Easy Company holed up in war-torn Belgium, the siege of Bastogne pressing in on every side. Soldiers crouched in shallow foxholes under the harsh winter sky, nerves frayed by constant mortar barrages and the bone-deep cold. In that dismal setting, few felt like laughing, except one man. Somewhere amid the tangle of frozen pine branches, George LUZ started mimicking a senior officer's voice so perfectly that startled soldiers paused mid-shiver, momentarily convinced the officer was actually present. Only when they spotted LUZ's mischievous grin did they catch on to the ruse. In the gloom of a desperate siege, that flash of levity meant the world. It took men out of their fear for a precious few seconds, reminding them of their own resilience. George LUZ was no typical soldier. He was the comedic heart of Easy Company, a role that might sound trivial, but in the brutal churn of World War II carried profound weight. For LUZ wasn't just a goofball, he was a crucial link in the chain of communication and morale, a man whose wit and unwavering energy helped keep an entire company afloat amid some of the war's fiercest battles. To truly understand how George LUZ came to be that vital spark, we travel back to June 17, 1921, in Fall River, Massachusetts, where he was born. The town, once bustling with textile mills, felt the strain of post-World War I economic shifts. He grew up in a hard-working family that later settled in or near West Warwick, Rhode Island. Some records place him firmly in West Warwick from an early age, an environment shaped by the Great Depression. As a boy, LUZ found ways to lighten the burdens that weighed on everyone. He entertained siblings and neighbors with jokes, impressions, and well-timed pranks, quickly revealing a knack for comedic timing. Teachers at his local school recall him as the kid who livened up the classroom with light-hearted banter, but never crossed into disrespect. Family and friends believed that his bright personality masked a sensitivity. He empathized with those struggling to put food on the table, turning to humor as an equalizer. By the late 1930s, while America navigated the tail end of the Depression, the darkening storm clouds of war loomed over Europe. Nazi Germany's aggressive expansion signaled that the global conflict would likely pull in nations far beyond the continent. In 1941, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the United States formally entered World War II. Like many young men of his generation, George LUZ was stirred by patriotic duty. He enlisted in the U.S. Army, though details about his exact date of enlistment differ slightly in some accounts. What is certain is that he soon discovered an opportunity that matched his adventurous spirit: the paratroopers. The newly formed airborne units sought men unafraid of risky leaps from airplanes, a test of nerves that not everyone could pass. By the time he arrived at Camp Toccoa, Georgia, to join the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, LUZ was a hardy presence, a man who balanced toughness with a perpetual grin. Toccoa's training was notoriously grueling, featuring endless runs up Currahee Mountain and punishing drills intended to forge a strong bond within each company. In the midst of that relentless routine, LUZ kept everyone's spirits up, impersonating the barked commands of an officer or the slow drawl of a fellow private, turning exhaustion into laughter. The men who formed Easy Company found in him an instant morale booster. Veterans of that training often mention his comedic gifts in the same breath as the punishing physical rigors they endured. And so when the 506 became part of the 101st Airborne, it was no surprise that LUZ was the designated radioman and, more importantly, the unofficial comedic anchor. In early 1944, with Allied commanders planning Operation Overlord, morale soared among paratroopers itching to prove themselves. For LUZ and many others, war had become personal. They wanted to see Hitler's Germany toppled, to bring a swift end to the conflict. On the night of June 5, 1944, the men of Easy Company boarded C-47s, bound for Normandy as part of the D-Day airborne drops. The flight across the English Channel was tense, moonlit skies and enemy flak, ensuring no illusions of safety. LUZ, radio set strapped across his back, tried to maintain a semblance of calm. He had always joked that a paratrooper's heart beat twice as fast at high altitude. This time, the humor fell flat in the face of the enormous invasion about to unfold. Dropping into Normandy in the dead of night brought confusion. Many paratroopers scattered miles from their designated zones, landing amid waterlogged fields or behind hedgerows thick with German patrols. LUZ found himself separated from much of Easy Company, forced to piece together a makeshift group from various regiments. Even so, he quickly put his radio to work, forging communications that allowed small pockets of troopers to converge. Several times he used broken German phrases, gleaned from fellow soldiers, to mislead or distract patrolling enemy squads. His comedic talents, ironically, proved useful as a tactical tool, granting him an ability to mimic accents or voices, sowing confusion. Over the course of that chaotic dawn, LUZ regrouped with Easy Company, helping them seize and hold critical positions near Sainte-Mère-Église. That day he performed not just comedic impressions, but the crucial function of coordinating messages that kept them alive. The campaign in Normandy evolved into a slog through hedgerows and farmland. Easy Company fought at Carentan, sustaining losses and forging deeper camaraderie. LUZ, who had gained a reputation for quick thinking, rarely hesitated to volunteer for missions that demanded a stable line of communication. Sometimes that meant lugging heavy radio gear across fields under mortar fire. Other times, it meant offering a wisecrack to break the tension before a perilous assault. Eyewitnesses recalled that if they glimpsed George LUZ in the middle of a firefight, spouting a line that mimicked Captain Sobel or Colonel Sink, they couldn't help but smile, as if reminded of their own humanity in the midst of horror. In September 1944 came Operation Market Garden, the Allies' bold plan to seize bridges in the Netherlands and punch a swift route into Germany. The 101st Airborne, including Easy Company, parachuted in broad daylight under heavy flak. For LUZ, this mission tested not only his fortitude, but also his technical skill with the radio, as the chain of command needed continuous updates on the scattered landing zones and the status of each unit. The operation met stiff German resistance. LUZ spent countless hours relaying urgent requests for reinforcements or ammo, occasionally switching channels to impersonate a commanding officer for comedic relief. That ability to lighten the mood never overshadowed his seriousness about the mission. He believed wholeheartedly in the Allies' cause, determined to see it through despite the creeping realization that Market Garden wasn't unfolding as planned. The next major trial was Bastogne in December 1944. The German counteroffensive in the Ardennes, later dubbed the Battle of the Bulge, encircled the 101st in the Belgian town. Under freezing conditions with minimal supplies, the men dug into shallow foxholes, battered by artillery. The morale among the half-frozen troopers wavered, yet LUZ, as if by reflex, resorted to humor. When ammunition was scarce and the crack of German 88s echoed through the forests, he'd impersonate the generals or even Allied tank drivers, coaxing a grin from men who might not have smiled for days. But behind the jokes lay desperation. LUZ's role as a communication link had become more vital than ever. If the regiment needed to coordinate artillery strikes or receive supply drops, it was men like LUZ who made it happen. He carefully shielded his radio from snow and ice, sometimes forming an improvised shelter with logs or broken boards. Despite the comedic veneer, Bastogne cost the unit dearly. Soldiers fell to sniper bullets, to frostbite, to the unrelenting bombardment. LUZ, writing in his personal notes, rare letters, to a friend back in Rhode Island, confessed that each casualty hit him like a personal wound, especially those with whom he'd shared laughs around a campfire only days before. But he soldiered on. The siege lifted when General Patton's Third Army arrived, yet the haunting memories of Bastogne lingered for all involved. They marched onward into Germany, culminating in the final push against the collapsing Nazi regime. Finally, with Germany's surrender in May 1945, the war in Europe ended. Like many an easy company, LUZ found it surreal that the savage conflict was concluding. He had survived by the narrowest margins, using quick wits to dodge not only bullets, but also the creeping despair that might have overwhelmed lesser spirits. After Germany's defeat, Easy Company and the entire 101st Airborne shifted to occupation duty. The men who had jumped into Normandy and endured Bastogne's bitter cold now found themselves policing a defeated Germany, witnessing the ruins of a war-torn land. For LUZ, the shift was disorienting. Gone was the immediate adrenaline of daily combat, replaced by a slower, more reflective pace. He often engaged with local civilians, bridging the language gap with comedic gestures, forging fleeting connections. The Army eventually demobilized many paratroopers, sending them home. By late 1945 or early 1946, George LUZ, like so many others, faced the challenge of returning to civilian life. The abrupt change from the intense brotherhood of war to the quiet of small-town America was no small feat. He wrestled with how to resume everyday normalcy, how to speak of experiences so raw that words often failed. Much of his personal life after the war remained somewhat private. Accounts suggest he struggled to find stable work initially, drifting between jobs. The comedic spirit that served him so well in a foxhole ironically made it difficult to settle into the subdued routines of post-war society. Some who knew him say he carried an undercurrent of sadness at the men lost, the horrors witnessed. But he remained at heart the same man, warm, approachable, quick to diffuse tension with a grin. He married, started a family, and tried to shield loved ones from the darker memories of combat. Letters or diaries from this period are scarce, but references from fellow veterans paint a portrait of a man grateful to be alive, yet occasionally haunted by the sense that the greatest purpose he'd known was left behind on Europe's battlefields. During the decades after World War II, the public's perception of the war hardened into broad heroic narratives: D-Day, the race into Germany, the final victory. People often forgot the daily grind that shaped men like LUZ. Then came new conflicts: Korea, Vietnam, shifting the national focus. Meanwhile, the veterans of Easy Company kept in touch, forming a network of reunions. They recalled that at these get-togethers, LUZ's comedic side reemerged, performing uncanny impersonations of old commanding officers, or reenacting comedic episodes from Taco days. If younger attendees asked for stories, he'd offer them with humility, focusing on the unity that carried them through. War controversies seldom dominated these events. They were more about cherishing a brotherhood forged in extremes. In the 1990s, historian Stephen E. Ambrose published Band of Brothers, a detailed narrative of Easy Company's experiences, which brought men like LUZ into the spotlight. The subsequent HBO miniseries in 2001 further amplified interest. Veterans who had once lived in relative obscurity found themselves recognized by new generations. Luz's comedic presence was depicted with affectionate emphasis, showing how he alleviated tension during training or at Bastogne. Younger viewers were touched by the idea that a well-timed joke or imitation could boost morale at a time when death lurked at every turn. It underscored that war's shaping forces aren't just grand strategy or weaponry, but also the intangible glue that keeps soldiers from succumbing to despair. Tragically, George LUZ passed away on October 15th, 1998, shortly before the miniseries catapulted Easy Company's story into mainstream consciousness. He never fully witnessed how modern audiences would revere him as the essential comedic soul of a revered unit. At his funeral, old comrades shared tears and laughter in equal measure, recalling pranks played on unsuspecting lieutenants or the time he diffused a near fist fight by perfectly mimicking a senior officer's admonishment. Family members spoke quietly about how his humor belied the quiet struggles he endured. War had scarred him deeply, but he never let that overshadow the love he held for close friends, his community, and the ideals for which he had fought. In subsequent years, controversies about the war might arise, debates about whether certain airborne operations were necessary, or about the strategic wisdom of some offensives. But few questioned the personal contributions of men like LUZ, who used a comedic flair to shore up morale at pivotal moments. Some historians reflect on how intangible influences, like a single soldier's comedic presence, might alter the tone of a unit, reducing fear and forging resilience. Others consider the moral dimensions, how a person can remain so lighthearted amid carnage, or how comedic relief might help soldiers cope with moral injury. The complexities of these questions point to the deeper significance of LUZ's story, revealing that in war, leadership can manifest as empathy and laughter as surely as in commanding a platoon or setting strategic policy. In the bigger historical context, George LUZ stands as a testament to the everyday soldier, whose presence can be as crucial as any grand battlefield maneuver. He never sought the limelight, never rose to high rank, never commanded sweeping offensives. But the emotional sustainment he provided was often the difference between men pushing forward or giving in to exhaustion. While generals planned the route of entire armies, it was the comedic radioman who kept an entire company's spirits intact, bridging the gap between monotony and terror with a well-timed gag. His personal life, beyond the battlefield, highlights the cost of dedicating one's prime years to combat. He left the best of his youth in the muddy fields of Europe, returning to build a family that never fully glimpsed the comedic brilliance their father had displayed in uniform. The heartbreak of losing close friends in war hung over him. He might reminisce at reunions or keep in touch with men who had shared his foxholes, but day-to-day existence demanded a different type of resilience. The comedic gift that had made him beloved in Easy Company did not vanish, but it carried an undertone of sorrow known only to those who had experienced the front lines. In the reflective lens of history, men like George LUZ rarely occupy the dramatic center stage of generals or political figures. Yet it's precisely such unsung roles that shape unit performance. Communication specialists, comedic morale boosters, men who can lighten hearts in the darkest times. These are the quiet heroes of any conflict. LUZ's memory serves as a reminder that even beyond medals or grand tactics, war is profoundly human. The synergy of a single individual's empathy and wit can tip the balance in a battle, at least psychologically, and that in the swirling, uncertain realm of combat can matter just as much as a well-executed flanking maneuver. George Luce's life story reverberates with the message that not all heroism is about fire and fury achievements. Sometimes it's about lifting spirits in a bleak forest, bridging the terrifying gap between life and death with a grin. Through Normandy, Carentan, Market Garden, and Bastogne, he channeled humor into a weapon against despair, forging a bond that helped ensure Easy Company's resilience. Modern audiences, seeing a world so often overshadowed by turmoil, might find hope in the notion that compassion, humor, and loyalty remain potent forces. The comedic angles of war aren't trivial, but can be the pivot on which morale, survival, and solidarity hinge. And that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.